Hey there, and welcome back to another Miraculous Ladybug video. And today I want to talk about a bit of news that I've seen circulating in the fandom for the last little while. In a bunch of Miraculous social media spaces, and for reference I saw this crop up a couple of times on the Miraculous Ladybug subreddit, there's been discussion that instead of 7, 8, 9 or 10 seasons that we're getting, I honestly can't keep up with what they say these days, was that they had 8 greenlit with plans for 10? Well, now we can scrap that as they're saying they have ideas for up to 14 seasons of the show. So double what we've had so far, with potential for even more after that if the popularity of the franchise holds up. Now, I have no idea if the sources here are legitimate, and you should always take this sort of thing with a grain of salt, as often things are taken out of context or lied about for clicks and views. But ultimately, it doesn't matter in this case, as whether it's legitimate news or not, simply a hypothetical maybe, the fandom's responded anyway, and from what I've seen, it seems to be a largely negative reaction. From my dive into those posts and through all of those comments, from what I've seen, it seems that people think that the writing for the show, based on how the first 5-season saga went, will not be able to hold up over the course of an additional 8 seasons. Plus, there was also a bunch of jokes made that this show's just going to run forever. The original fans are going to be old by the time those 14 seasons come to a close. I mean, we're in season 6 now, and it's taken about a decade. By the time that season 6 finishes up, it probably will have been about 10 years since the first season debuted. So a decade for 6 seasons. Another 6 seasons on top of that's going to bring us to 2035 for season 12. And then 2 more on that would have us creeping closer to 2040. Yikes, yikes, yikes. That's a lot of time. Obviously, if that's the case, well, I guess this channel has a lot more Miraculous content to churn out. We'll all grow old together. However, I do want to touch on whether I think the quality can hold up a little bit. But first, I do want to say, the surprise within the fandom to this type of news really did, well, surprise me. I'm a bit shocked to tell you the truth. Because for me, this does seem like a very obvious statement to make, doesn't it? Miraculous started off its run as a bit of an underdog, to tell you the truth. It did have financial backing, but it clearly did not have the biggest budget in the world. It was a clear attempt to cash in on the popularity of superheroes that permeated the cinematic landscape of the 2010s. They had success and developed a cult following, which then grew and grew to become wildly popular. Not only within the original age demographic, which is kids, let's be real, but like many top-tier and successful made-for-kids shows, think Avatar and Bluey, it crossed over and got fans of all ages. This widespread appeal meant that Miraculous had a meteoric rise in popularity, which meant more investment and companies wanting to get involved, toy sales, better and more lucrative distribution deals, and in turn, the expansion of the franchise. We saw the launch of the World Specials and then the release of the feature film adaptation, comics and video games, the revamping of the franchise with a new animation style in Season 6. Hell, I'm pretty sure even last year or the year before, the creators came out and openly said the franchise just had its most lucrative financial year on record. They even made their own new company that's going to oversee the future of the franchise. You don't do that for something you're planning to end in a couple more seasons. You do that for something that you intend to stand the test of time and become its own franchise. Think the long game, think Marvel, think DC. That's what the creators have in mind here, where it's one long continuous property. It seems like they're putting out feelers into side characters and spin-off shows to test the waters of how far they can push things. Plus, they already have alternate versions. There's a show canon, there's the film canon, same characters but different timelines. Much like you'd see in comic books or separate comic films based on the same character. Amazing Spider-Man versus MCU Spider-Man for reference. They want to keep this going for the long haul, to be an evergreen franchise like so many others are these days, but especially in the superhero space. Hell, I wouldn't be shocked to see Miraculous straight up rebooted at some point in the future. Or there for at least to be a Miraculous next gen, but that's a discussion for another time, isn't it? So all of this does have me rather shocked overall that there's any sort of, well, not negativity or backlash, because people are allowed to feel what they want to feel, but more surprise. I mean, for God's sake, just look at trends across the film and TV industry. The reality is that nostalgia is selling like hotcakes. Take a look at the big hitters for animation, Disney and Pixar. They've spent the first years of the 2010s struggling. Even after COVID, people just couldn't be bothered coming to see their new IP. Disney had 2 back-to-back box office bombs in 2022 and 2023 for fresh IP, only to crack $1 billion at the box office for Moana 2 and pivot to sequels. Frozen sequels, a Zootopia sequel's coming later this year. Then there's Pixar, who had the same issue, only for them to release Inside Out 2, and what do you know, lots of money. I'm not commenting on the quality of the films. I'm just saying that nostalgia and established IP are a very safe bet in this climate. Miraculous is both a fresh IP that's still continuously coming out, drawing a fresh legion of little kids every year, but it also has a major nostalgia factor. Having been around for a decade means there's a full decade's worth of older fans who could be drawn back in to make it even more lucrative. Is it any wonder they're milking this for all it's worth then? On top of that, I do think people are allowing their disdain for the news to somewhat cloud their judgment in regards to the development. I've seen a lot of people have some pretty hot takes about how this is going to tank the franchise and that by the end nobody's going to be watching, that they'll bleed their audience dry. Somehow, these comments often find themselves getting hundreds of likes or upvotes. Once again, I'm not making any sort of judgment call as to whether or not this is a good idea. What I am saying is that people really do overlook how popular this show likely is. They likely get very high viewership, metrics they can track. Otherwise, they would have been stupid to make that company, right? Even if people age out of the content or leave the fandom, do you know what's going to happen next? A new demographic of fresh young kids appears and the cycle will start again and again and again. This is the golden goose and it is still laying. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but I'd be shocked if the doomsayers actually turn out to be right, because to me it just doesn't make any sense based on what we've seen so far. Also, there's been a lot of shit talking of Astric in particular towards this decision, but does he have full creative and business control? I don't think he does. Doesn't Zag and likely other executives have a stake in this? Surely what they say goes, with Astric checking his bank balance and saying, yeah, I think of ideas for 14 seasons. I just think the disdain is being directed in the wrong place. So that's all well and good. I think I've made it clear that overall this was the obvious play from a business POV, and it really shouldn't be catching anybody off guard. But does that necessarily mean the quality is going to be high? Will it be a good idea from a creative point of view? Honestly, if you asked me at the end of season 6, I'd probably be able to give you a more comprehensive and clear idea of what I think. As of right now though, everything's really in limbo, and I'm rather on the fence. Seasons 1 and 2 were, from a creative standpoint, probably the two best received seasons. Season 1 was by far the most basic we've ever had. A pure monster of the week format. Somebody gets akumatized, the hero step in to save the day. Not much character development and not much overall story progression. It's fair enough though, because it serves as a concept to build off of. And it's what hooked people into the characters to begin with, into the heroes. Season 2 is where we started to push forward the story. The way the episodes were framed and the story being told was still basic, but we were getting a bit of development on the side. We were learning about Emily and getting new heroes, but there were still heaps of episodes where it felt like nothing really happened. It was a very basic monster of the week. Didn't matter though, because we were still having fun. It still felt fresh as they added in those new elements I mentioned earlier. Season 3's where the mutterings of the slower pace of the story started to pick up more steam, but at the same time, it did feel that things were building slowly, and they started doing a couple of marquee episodes outside of just the finales. Stuff that was really exciting, like Oblivio or Cat Blanc. Interesting what-if style episodes that, whilst reversed at the end, were massively hype at the time. You all know it's true. Then there were episodes like Felix that actually started to see plot threads get tugged on. It wasn't much, but it was more than we got before. The downside being that it still felt snail pace, and the shifting character dynamics was starting to bother people, namely with Cat Noir feeling less and less important. Then Miracle Queen happened, and I don't honestly think the fandom's ever been the same since then. It was pretty bad, let's be honest, and I think it somewhat poisoned the well in terms of fan discourse online. It never recovered. From a narrative construction point of view, Season 4 built on the idea of this marquee episode and started making clusters of connected episodes that were related by a shared story thread. In that regard, Season 4 was really good, but the content was still hit or miss. They had that alternate ship scenario which they sank early for no reason, which meant far less drama and far less excitement. They then reverted the protagonist back to the status quo like nothing ever happened. They doubled and tripled down on Chloe being whack, and Cat Noir really found himself on the outs. Plus, it felt like there was no end in sight to any of this, and no real hope of big changes in the story. Until Felix appeared at the end to change all of that in a banger 2-part finale, which saw Ladybug lose all the Miraculouses except for hers and Cat Noir's. So they did make a lot of strides, but they kept falling back into old habits and creative blunders that made it hard to enjoy the show. That being said, the finale was so hype that they managed to springboard into Season 5 in a really strong creative position. Season 5 saw them keep that cluster storytelling model, but also started to more readily integrate longer form storytelling, where story threads from different clusters or standalone episodes would get picked up far later in the season. Creatively, they were doing well with a lot of cool storylines. Gabe being nice to Adrian and spending time with him while slowly dying. Lila becoming a power player in the background. Natalie's rebellion against Gabe. More crumbs about Emily. Stuff with Gabe and his former identity. Senti theory. Adrianette finally setting sail. Hell yeah, that was hype. Kagami and Felix, which was very cute. Hell, just Felix in general, who had a cool story arc that season. Of course, this was then spliced in with less good stuff. They quadrupled down on the Chloe stuff, which was very tired by this stage of the game. Then they had that terrible finale with Andre and Zoe. Ugh. Oh, and Luca was completely wasted too. They had a cool arc where he knew both the identities of the main heroes, and it just went nowhere. He went off to become a monk, and then he's come back in the finale. I suspect they won't even really reference it much again. It was just to get him out of the way. Then there was the finale, which was trash. You know it and I know it. Despite those strides they made both structurally and narratively, they just bungled it completely at the end. So you come out of season 5 with a sour taste, even though for the most part the season was decent. It's pretty much the antithesis of season 4. Then they go and release 2 really fun and exciting specials. So it serves as proof they can write compelling storylines. Then we come to season 6, right? So far, I've liked what I've seen. You might disagree, but I think what we've had so far is for the most part quite good. It feels like the story is moving towards more character-based storylines in those episodes that aren't pushing forward the main story. It feels like the main characters can still get their moments, like Marinette and her ladybug knows best attitude towards telling Adrian the truth about his dad, or Cat Noir finally getting a new use for his power. Whilst we also explore side characters in more depth. We're getting a sense of mystery that we haven't had since season 1. Everybody's wondering, where's Lila? Is she hiding in plain sight? Where's she at? Side characters getting clear storylines. Sabrina, of all characters, had a proper episode to flesh her out and pursue her own narrative and redemption. Zoe is clearly being set up for a big story. So is Alia, we saw that in the latest release. In Sublimation, we see Tomoe still scheming in the background, which is surely going to involve Kagami and probably Felix at some point. For me, overall, despite a bit of character regression in Marinette, the concept is feeling pretty fresh again. So the signs are there that it could be good, and shows the show can be freshened up. It can be repurposed and build its aura again. But ultimately, there is absolutely zero proof that any of this matters, and no proof that the payoffs will be any good, because they utterly fumbled the biggest storyline a decade in the making. They still have another huge one, and that's one I'm terrified is going to truly suck. The big identity reveal. My God, wouldn't that be depressing? I suppose what I'm trying to say is this. Yes, I think the show can go on indefinitely and still work very well. The concept can be freshened up. We can see this. I don't think the way the episodes are currently playing out feels stale, and I did in season 3 and 4 at times. I think they can introduce new narrative elements for those seasons, and as long as people latch onto them, they can work. A new big villain could be introduced this season or next season to be a minor villain like Lila was for years, and I'd believe it when they take charge. They could bring in that alternate universe villain from the Paris special, and I would believe it as long as the writing sets it up properly. The main problem a lengthy run faces is the inability to provide quality payoffs to story arcs and stagnated character development where nothing happens and characters never change for far too long. Based on what we've seen so far in season 6, I don't know, maybe they're building to some character development. We're having some good signs for the minor characters, although Marinette is a little troubling. But I have no proof that the payoffs are going to be any good. I think the final test is this season. If the Gabe was Monarch reveal amounts to nothing, and doesn't massively shift the characters of both Adrian and Marinette, then you'll have your answer, won't you? Wake me up at the end of the season, and then we'll see. Until then, though, these have just been my opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of everything I've said today? Are you with me? Maybe not? Do you have anything you want to add? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.